Now, before we dive into the details of the different parameters and the granular details, which is almost infinite, it feels like anyway, especially when I'm approaching a tutorial series like this one. Before we get into all that, let's talk about the kind of best thing about Omnisphere, which is the existing library of sounds. I reckon it would be completely worthwhile just buying Omnisphere and never doing any editing yourself, because the patch, the sound source and the multi-libraries are so extensive. You have so much stuff in here which kind of works out the box. So let's talk about browsing. As I mentioned in the previous videos, every time you see one of these kind of dark areas here, or more specifically the folder icon, what you can do is you can click on that and you go into browsing mode. You see another one here at the patch level or the part level, and then on the layer, when you're on, say for example A, and on sample, you can go into the library here for the sound source browser. And of course you have this mini browser on the left. So for the purposes of this video, what I'm going to go through is just patch browsing, because that's kind of the one that I find myself using the most. I tend not to use multis because they're a bit huge, and individual sound sources I might not mess around with unless I'm really trying to get specific. So you'll probably want to start off your journey inside of the sounds in Omnisphere at the patch level or the part level. So I'm going to click on this here and we're going to go into the full patch browser library here. Now the first thing I want you to look at is this here, this section which says directory. Currently we're on all Spectrasonics, and that means that this far window on the right here, so long as I haven't got any of my filters set up here, which you can see I'm just looking at all. We'll explain more about these in a second. What we have is all Spectrasonics, right? We have a huge amount of stuff in here, and we can click on any of these and preview them and see what they sound like. So that's the way that the browser works fundamentally. But if I change this here, you see that I have a number of different directories. And because I own a number of the different Spectrasonic stuff, I have access to the Trillion library, the Omnisphere library, obviously, and then the Keyscape library, and then some older libraries. So before Omnisphere, it was Atmosphere. So you can preview any of these here, or just keep all Spectrasonics, and that's usually what I do. There's also stuff like user directories here, which we'll get into hopefully in a later video. So that's the main one. Make sure you're on all Spectrasonics. We'll go over the rest of these things in a second, but I'm going to go down to this section here, which is the attributes. Currently we're showing attributes. We could be looking at file directory or sound match, but I'm just going to look at attributes for now and talk about that. So because the library is so absolutely massive, what we need to do is think about filtering it down. And this is the way that these columns work here. So currently we're looking at category here, and say I want to look at, for example, perhaps I don't know, guitars, right? You can see that not only do my secondary filters, secondary, tertiary, and quarterly, don't know what that word is, they change, right? That this is drastically reduced, the library on the right here. So anything here is going to be tagged, and we'll understand a bit more about what tags are, but it's going to be kind of under the, you hope anyway, if your library's kept well, under the category of guitars. It's a funny patch, that one. Or some other ones here. You have different genres, right? So say that one I'm listening to, I'm like, wow, I really don't like that sound. Say I'm like, okay, this is a bit kind of cheesy, right? Let's see if we can perhaps make it a bit more what I'm after. Right, okay, cool. So that's less forgiving. That's a much more kind of like gritty sound there. So what I did there is I went over to the genre filter and chose my genre down there. Or you can go back to all. So you can see that by the time we've kind of used at least two of these filters here, we're already reducing our amount of choices. But we can actually change these panels here. So we could change category to project. We'll cover projects later on. You can see that actually I've got a number of projects that I've set up. So ethnic strings, I've only actually got one in there, or like funk has got one in there. I haven't done enough of my own library management, but for example, film BPM, I've got a number of things in my own project. So that's projects, but we can change all of these now to be, for example, mood, and then we can search by mood and gender. I'm not really sure about that one. And then presumably it'd be about vocals, that one. And then technique as well. So you can see just randomly hitting stuff here, and some of them aren't necessarily, they're kind of cross-compatible. So you notice there that my choice of mood doesn't give, and then euphoric doesn't give me a number of different techniques inside of here, but another choice within, say, category might give me that. So you can play around with a number of things in here. So this is all pretty clear for you. Let's look at the top level here. We've got attributes, obviously, and we've got file directory. Now, this is different to the directory here because this should really be called maybe, or be better thought of as library. So here I could look at the Keyscape library, the Trillion library, etc., etc. The file directory is really where it's kept on your computer. So this is exactly how everything will look in your file system where all the Omnisphere sounds are kept. So you can choose to look at Omnisphere in that way if you're kind of managing your sounds in your folders on your computer in a kind of more intentional way. But then we have sound match, which is really, really useful. So the way that this works is basically you find a sound that you like. So let's say that one, that BPM, art BPM track or patch that I found. Let's say I like that sound. All I need to do is click on sound match and match current selection. I think it probably already has. And what we have is by basically inside of Omnisphere with its own algorithm, it works out the apparently most similar patch to that. So this was our original one. Let's see whether it's done a good job. So some of them are clearly kind of related, and some of them are less, but it kind of by its own algorithm tells you. So down here we'll have really sort of virtually no match to the original sound. So sound match is really, really useful, and combined with things like sound lock, which we'll look at later on, you can do some really, really useful stuff. As I mentioned earlier, projects is really, really useful, where you can create your own projects. It's like your own folders. So say I like a sound, let's choose something. And I say, hey, I want to remember that sound. We could either tag it, which is something we'll look at hopefully later, but we could more easily put that inside of a project. And actually I've set up a project which is called ethnic string, and I put it in there. And then later on when I'm browsing my library and I'm like, hey, there was that sound, what was it again? Okay, I'm going to go into my project, ethnic string, and I believe it wasn't that one, it was this one, wasn't it? So it's a really useful way of managing your sounds. Then, of course, we have the sharing area here, which is where you can export your patches or your multis or even your sound sources as well and share them with other Omnisphere users. We won't go over that. Not yet, anyway. And then we have at the bottom here in our header, our footer rather, we have edit tags, which is where we can really, really get into kind of proper kind of library management stuff. And I won't be going over that at this stage of the course anyway, because it's a bit overkill, really. You just want to kind of get going and understanding the sounds. Then we have the settings here. This is where you can do things that allow you to browse more easily. So for example, if I'm going through the library and really, really doing some research, I'm kind of in the research phase or the sound design phase where I'm kind of gathering different things for my project. Being able to kind of quickly audition sounds can be quite useful. So I could turn this on, for example, and then as soon as I click something, it's going to play me a really simple quick note of that, so I can hear it without having to find my keyboard or reach over to my keyboard and hear that note. And you can change the audition note, obviously, to anything on the keyboard, and you can also change the length of that audition note. So for example, for lead sounds, you probably want this to be a bit longer. Progressive loading helps you audition the sound before it's fully loaded. So if I choose up another sound here, let's try and choose something that might be complex. What I want you to do is look up here, and you see when I click it, you see that green bar popped up there. Now that was actually fairly quick, but sometimes you get some complex sounds which take a while to load. And whilst that's yellow, it's saying something along the lines of preview. You can play this now. You're able to preview that without the full amount of RAM being taken up. But there's one little ergonomic thing here, which is mini browser up, down arrow keys. Now, it's quite a useful thing to keep on, but if for some reason it's annoying, you can turn it off. But I'll just show you the functionality. If I get out of here and we have access to the mini browser again, if I'm kind of going through something, I just press down on my keyboard, as in my writing keyboard, not my music keyboard, and I can move up and down whatever list I'm currently in. Now, if you don't like that functionality, say you have some keyboard shortcuts enabled in your DAW and you want to turn that off, you can go back into the browser, go to the footer of the browser and go to settings, and then you can turn that off there. Okay, so that's an overview of the browser. What I would suggest that you do now is probably, before watching the rest of this video, or this course rather, you could actually go through the library, this first area, and look at the categories, the different categories, and get your head around a little bit the different primary sounds, because this is sort of the top level that we have here. You can ignore my category here, because that's a little mistake on my part in my library. But you have bass, for example, ARP and BPM, which is arpeggiators, and BPM kind of orientated instruments that sound like rhythmical. And then you have lots and lots of other things inside of Omnisphere in terms of the fundamental categories that you might want to explore.